LSU football. You've put out some great write-ups lately on The Advocate. The first one I want to start with is the new revenue-sharing era of college sports. It feels like LSU is maybe a little more better prepared for this shift in the NIL space than they were with the original NIL decision maybe in 2022 or whenever that was. It feels like they have a better plan in place. Would I be wrong in saying that?
Well, first of all, real quick, sorry for barely speaking a second ago. I was not sure how it's working. Also, yes, great to be with y'all. And I think this is the first time that we've been able to link up since the rebrand. So congrats on the move and everything.
Thank you very much.
So to answer your question, are they better prepared? I think that it's not that they really weren't prepared for what, NIL first started as in 2021. LSU came out the gates with that, trying to help market its athletes and build their brands and all of those things. And I think it did a fairly good job of that at times. What it wasn't prepared for was when NIL quickly, or rather quickly at least, turned into these booster funded collectives, basically using NIL as a way to pay players over the table and sort of under the guise of NIL and be able to just sort of pour money into rosters. It's been reported by myself and others that LSU was behind financially for a few years in that realm, and not really until the fundraising push took place over the past year did they catch up. And so I think that they're better prepared for this in that unless the landscape takes some shifts that we just don't anticipate, they have really gone after already this sort of partnership with Playfly Sports for helping arrange third-party NIL deals to be able to then go over the cap. And, Learfield is doing that. They're a similar multi-media rights company that's doing that with Georgia and with Texas and with Ohio State, and LSU is doing that as well, just with its partner Playfly. And so that could be, really beneficial for them if these sort of if the NIL rules are able to actually cap booster spending on players like they're intended to, then LSU thinks that this could really put them in a strong place because of their, again, sort of what they were good at right out the gates in 2021, which was marketing players and sort of helping them find that NIL. I think they would be probably well suited for that because they have done a pretty good job of it in that part over the past few years.
And on the collective front, obviously it is a shift happening towards revenue sharing, kind of away from these crowdfunding collectives. What does it truly mean for Bayou Traditions? What purpose will the collective serve moving forward in this new revenue sharing era?
Yeah, it's still kind of uncertain. Anybody I've talked to who's associated with the collective or in LSU's athletic department has said it's basically a little bit unclear at the moment. They're not disbanding, Kelly Zinn said. They're not just sort of shuttering it, which we've already seen some other schools do. I think Georgia came out yesterday, said it's closing its collective in favor of this Learfield partnership I mentioned. I think, plenty of other schools have sort of gone that route already. Bayou Traditions isn't fully closing, but it could. But the reason for that is that Kelly Zinn said it could end up maybe being used for another purpose, which is to kind of go after high school recruits. High school players aren't covered under the terms of the settlement, so there's this thought that maybe you can start kind of paying them. How you do that without it being a straight up recruiting inducement, pay for play, and just get in a whole bunch of trouble, I don't really know. But they've sort of said that they might keep the collective around for that purpose if that's sort of where things go. They don't want to be caught flat-footed if that's what ends up happening. And so we'll see if Bayou Traditions serves a role in that way. I think for the current LSU student, the current LSU athlete on campus, it's not really the primary way now, though, in which they'll make money. A lot of those deals were front-loaded over the first half of this year, so they've been gotten a lot over the past few months from Bayou Tradition. But now it's going to transition into revenue sharing and then helping them find these third-party NIL deals.
Does this feel like it is a more structured kind of future for college sports? I know that the College Sports Commission has been created, which, if we know anything about college sports, kind of like you were just talking about with the collectives, is somebody's going to find the loophole and find their way around some of these new rules. Does this feel like a more structured position for the sport moving forward after what's really been the wild, wild west for the last handful of years?
In theory, it does. We'll see if that ends up being if the rules hold up. And I think that's kind of the big question. If you're able to cap the NIL spending in a way that it at least is, maybe you don't have these sort of outlandish, multi-million-dollar deals in exchange for the athlete doing very little, then that would probably give us some more structure. The thing though that it hasn't changed, which has always been a big piece of sort of maybe what we're talking about in terms of chaos and wild, wild west, what has contributed to that, is that the transfer portal is still, athletes can just transfer as many times as they want during their career and have immediate eligibility. And that I don't think should change necessarily, because, who's to say that the athlete shouldn't have the right to transfer like they do? But that's also a big element of this that hasn't changed. There's still, 2 transfer portal windows. You can go and you can play somewhere else right away. And that's caused, a lot of tampering. And so, without that part changing, it could help if those NIL rules are able to sort of withstand any legal challenges that are likely to come their way.
And I guess I'm trying to think of the way to phrase this because I don't understand it and I'm a little dumb. When you have like be kinder to yourself, Lloyd. Oh, thank you. Yeah, very dumb. You're right. When you have like this other model that they still have an NIL version of it where it has to go through the clearinghouse and there's I guess almost like an arbitration period, who's to say that they won't use the exact same argument that they've been using for, like, you can't cap my worth if somebody's willing to pay me. Like, that's what's caused this, because legally that's what the rule is. And so there's millions or hundreds of court cases that have proven that this is why you're allowed to pay players now. And if somebody wants to pay them $10 million, it's well within their right to do so.
Exactly. No, you hit the nail on the head. That's I think what a lot of people are interested to see if that plays out, concerned about that happening, all those sorts of things. It's kind of the big question here, I think, moving forward is, can this NIL ruling over, if it's over $600, it has to be approved. And if it's not approved, then who's to say exactly that, like, somebody doesn't value that athlete at that price point? And because they at first, remember, a lot of the language we were seeing coming out about this was that it had to be a fair market value. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how do you determine fair market value for someone who's in LA versus someone who's in, the middle of Missouri versus, nationwide? That kind of differs from place to place, and it differs from company to company and person to person. So it's like, how are you going to do that? They've shifted that now to a reasonable range of compensation and serving a valid business purpose. And perhaps that's what, can withstand and hold up is the valid business purpose part in particular. Like, okay, is like signing one autograph or doing one social media post, really worth $700,000? Like, probably not. But again, though, it's like, well, the company argues that it is to them. I don't know how you say no to that.
And then on the Garrett Nusmire front, you had a sit down.
Stuff.
Yes, you had a sit down with LSU's star quarterback. What are the true expectations for LSU's 2025 Signal Car heading into his money season before the draft?
I mean, the expectations are really high. I think for Garrett, he has high expectations for himself too. He wants to be just a lot, I think, cleaner than he was last year. Better decision making, and also, use his legs when it makes sense. One of the questions I asked Garrett was, I mean, for you, like, what does running look like? You're not going to be a 1,000-yard rusher. Like, what do you? And he laughed at that and said, like, no, it's not going to be a 1,000-yard rusher, but to be able to stress defenses in that way, make them respect it, to then open up other things in the passing game, which is, I think, what everybody around here, wanted to see a little bit more of last year. So now he's, trying to really focus on knowing when to run, getting his body ready for that. He's working a lot on his sort of quick twitch muscles in his legs, trying to work on his explosiveness. And he's, I think, he seems to be pretty positive about what that could result in this year. And also just like things that he won't talk about too much. Garrett's always been one not to really dive into details about what he is trying to improve upon in his own game as a passer. But there are things that he's working on there too, especially when it comes to decision making. And I mean, gosh, you're seeing him already in the first round of mock drafts. You're seeing he has pretty high Heisman odds. If he can, sort of galvanize everything around him and take advantage of, the weapons that he has on the outside. And if LSU has some first-round receiver talent out there, which is obviously what they've had in the years when Joe Burrow and Jay Daniels won Heisman's, and Nussmeier is able to cut down on the interceptions, I mean, he's probably going to be that first-round type of talent. And if LSU's playing meaningful games at the end of the year, then he's probably in the Heisman conversation. And I don't think that's unreasonable to anticipate. Expect is maybe a little bit different, but I think that it could, certainly be in that. We could be there at the end of November.
Because when you look at the roster that LSU has put around him and the talent that has been placed around him when they've got the transfer portal, how they've recruited at the wide receiver position, I do think is it fair to say that maybe the biggest thing that I've seen change from year to year, Garrett Nusmire obviously knows now he's the starting quarterback. Like, there's no debate. He comes in with that experience. Have you seen kind of like a shift in the chemistry between, like, bringing in new transfer portal players, having to work very quickly together? But it seems like whenever you see the social media stuff, the chemistry has almost been most important as gaining weight or losing weight.
That absolutely is. It's something that Garrett talked about. They understand, he said, that this team needs to be close. The players need to be close. But the closest teams are the ones that win championships. And that's something that all of them have been trying to work on together. When you do have, like, a bunch of new players who are going to be playing key roles on this team, they've got to figure out kind of how to come together and come together fast. And yet you're hearing Garrett Nusmire at least say that this is the closest team that he's been on at LSU, that this is the best roster he's been on at LSU. We'll see if that's just off-season talk or if it's, really what he feels and sees out there. They're trying to make that kind of happen and come together by, whether it's going out and just eating or, Nick Anderson and him were in Dallas together at one point working out, trying to kind of catch up on some lost time after Nick was banged up during the spring, didn't really, wasn't like full go, it seemed at times, trying to kind of get on that same page, keep throwing with the receivers, all them all down at the Manning Passing Academy, just trying to work on that timing and that chemistry, because it didn't quite seem like they were all clicking in the spring, so you got to keep working on that in the summer so that they're ready for game one. It is just as important as anything else.
A little bit of a off-season speculation question here. Would you be surprised if you see Garrett Nusmire don that number 18 jersey going into next season?
Ooh, that is an interesting question, because it's like, who else on offense would necessarily make sense for that, right? I mean, probably nobody else. Garrett would be the one who I think would make the most sense. I'm like trying to think through everybody on the roster all of a sudden, like very quickly to see if anybody else would sort of. I wouldn't be surprised if it was him, because he makes sense in all the ways that you like everything you want from 18, the kind of role that they have on the team, that leadership thing, like the way he sort of carries himself around the team. I think that he checks all those boxes. The only question really is, like, does he want it?
Right.
He wears 13 because his dad wears 13. It's always been a special number for him. And so I'd be fascinated, though, to see, if he wants 18, and I'm sure that LSU would probably like to give it to him and because he makes the most sense offensively.
And the first quarterback since it would be Matt Mock?
Yeah, I think so, right?
Yeah.
I can't think of everybody else. I'm trying to like cycle through everything, all like the whole list, and I don't think that. Yeah, I think it's Mock.
Well, because what do you like? He fits, like you said. It makes the most sense. He fits the bill. He's somebody that stuck around, could have hit the portal, comes back, like does all the right things. He's a coach's son, like really loves LSU. Like, what else do you really need to do? And he's an important player on the team,
right?
The quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and I just can't think of anybody else on the offensive side who like sort of checks all those same type of boxes, who's been here as long, who, sort of has that leadership role on the team, who I think that's a key part too, right? Like a lot of these guys like have the personalities who I think could one day be 18, but like they just haven't sort of been around as long as Garrett is, hasn't established himself as a starter as long as Garrett has, which sort of think maybe is important in that decision too.
Yeah, because it feels like on defense there's multiple guys that you could say off the top of your head. I mean, Whitweeks, Jacoby, and Guillory, like leaders, guys that kind of fit that mold. Offensively, there's
been just so much turnover and change.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Well, ask Garrett at media days. Hey, do you want 18?
There you go. There you go. Good question. Speaking of the other important number at LSU, number 7, Harold Perkins, obviously coming back from injury. Is there any news on that front and kind of where he's at and kind of what it's going to look like moving forward for him going into fall camp?
Yeah, no news, which I think is probably a good thing because the expectation has been really since before spring practice that he would be able to participate in summer workouts and then be full go for preseason camp. I actually was able to speak with Harold recently, catch up with him just very briefly during a photo shoot that we did with him for a story that's going to come out in August going into camp. And, we didn't get to do the full sit-down interview yet. It was just the picture. So we were only able to talk for just a second. But he was sort of saying that, he's not like completely fully doing like everything, no limitations whatsoever yet, but that was sort of like, okay, like they're trying to kind of conserve him in a way to make, and also just kind of ease him back into things. You're coming off an ACL, like you don't want that person to go too hard, too fast, too soon. And so everything, the expectation was still that he'd be participant for preseason camp, on track to still be, able to play, week one against Clemson, all those things like that. It still seems like that's the direction they're heading in. So that's kind of it's not really news. It's just sort of everything seems to still be moving in the direction that it's supposed to. One of the examples that he gave was like sometimes right now when they're doing like, say they have 4 reps of something, he's only doing 2, but that wasn't a concern to him. Like that was sort of the plan right now so that they weren't putting too much stress on that surgically repaired knee.
With baseball season being over, obviously every kind of the attention shifts to football very quickly. Is it fair to say that, can you put a number or the temperature on Brian Kelly and even just week one? With all the changes that they've made and everything, everybody's all in. Like you can't run from it. So I'm just wondering what you think the tenor of that conversation around Brian Kelly is.
Yeah, I mean, is it fair to give it like a 6.5?
Yes.
If you were doing like a heat check, like a 6, I don't think it's like a I wouldn't want to put it above a 7 unless they actually like were to lose the Clemson game week 1, and then it'll probably be like a 12. But I guess maybe about a 6, just because there's pressure on him. Like donors stepped up in a big way, and now they want to see results. You're going to year 4. You haven't really gotten that close to the playoff since he took over, and that's been the expectation since he arrived. He's said it himself was national championships, and so now there's been this investment in the roster. He said it's the best roster that he's had at LSU, and so now there needs to be results to back that up. And so I think that this is a big year for Brian Kelly. Would LSU move on from him if things really bottomed out or something like that? Like I don't know. It's too early to really say. You also have to keep in mind his buyout at the end of the year would still be in the range of $50 million. That's a big number when you've just entered into this revenue sharing era and the business of your athletic department is in a little bit of a transition phase. So I don't really know, but it's time for him to certainly start, fulfilling that contract and that goal of national championships and at least championship contention. Does LSU need to win one this year to take the heat off Brian Kelly? No, I don't think so, but they need to make the playoffs, I think, at the very least.
One thing that we've kind of discussed a little bit just in-house here, is there any pressure added to Kelly and the football program when you see other programs at the same school find success like LSU baseball has, where they've won 2 national championships in 3 seasons? Obviously, they're different programs, but just kind of under the same umbrella, does it add pressure in a city like Baton Rouge at a school like LSU when this program's got 2 natties in 3 years and LSU just still hasn't gotten over the hump?
Yeah, I've never bought into that too much myself, just because like it's LSU football. Like how much more expectation and pressure can you really put on it than there would be otherwise? I feel like there would still be that even if none of the other programs at LSU won championships. Like it would still be that on football that it needs to go and win these titles. And if it's not, then there's just sort of this pressure to be able to go and do that. So I've never really run into that. Maybe I'm just wrong. I don't know, but it's something that I remember. 2023 going into year 2. Brian Kelly was asked about that a lot with Jay Johnson winning 1 in year 2 and Kim Mulkey winning 1. He sort of would joke about it to kind of deflect. That he needed to win 1. That just raise expectations on you and all that. And I just feel like it's always that way for football, but I don't know. Do y'all see that differently?
I think, and Lloyd made this point the other day, that it's less of pressure on Kelly and more kind of on Scott Woodward, of like as much as he's made the right hires in these other realms. Like you're still judged on football more than anything else. And so like it adds some pressure to Kelly, but I think you're right in the thought process of the pressure on football is going to be there regardless.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought with Woodward too, especially because Kelly was his hire.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Comes in and ends up firing Ed, and then hires Brian Kelly. Like this is Scott Woodward's hire, and I'm sure Scott Woodward would like to see that pan out, especially to say the least. Especially with how involved or not really involved necessarily, or is invested and interested as he is in football. I mean, he's around the ops building all the time, and he goes to practices and stuff. Like he wants to see football win. This is his hire, and so I think that's not a bad point there.
Well, we appreciate you making some time for us today. Great work, your recent write-ups over at The Advocate, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me, y'all. This new studio looks good.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you very much. We'll talk soon.